Hi, this is Know Your Artist series, a very boring and useless program. So please, before anything else, click on a button right here to add this video to your watch later list, where you'll completely forget about its existence and save yourself some time to do some actual productive things instead of doing this. This is going to be our last episode, and today we're going to talk about love with Damien Rice. Damien Rice is not big at all. He is an indie musician, independent, and he's quite small. He produced only 3 albums so far in his career, and he got a little more famous since his last album, but he's been used a lot in a lot of terrible TV shows, mostly vampire love stories. And the most notable one I can mention is his song 9 Crimes being used in Shrek 3. Damien Rice is an Irish singer. He was born in 1973, 72. He had the rock band Juniper, and before they produce any album, he leaves. He goes to Europe, lives by himself for a couple of years between different countries, does farming, experiences life, comes back, writes his first album, borrows some money to make it, and it turns out to be very good. That's where he works with Lisa Hannigan. His celloist Vivian is pretty good. She has an album of her own. He makes his second album 9, and he tops all the charts, and he's very appreciated, although he's a romantic love songwriter. And finally, after the departure of Lisa Hannigan, he gets himself together, and 8 years later he releases his last album, my favorite, Faded Fantasy. Structurally, he plays folk songs. However, he does infuse that with a lot of rock in his background, and therefore you can hear his power chords playing throughout his entire career. For example, listen to this song, Woman Like a Man.
Need a head, wanna wait, suck it up, come.
Another famous signature move that he does in his music that makes it better is his usage of layers. So he sings and plays layers on top of each other, therefore there's a lot happening. He creates a big atmosphere of a room that a couple of different voices are all climaxing with each other. Some of the best examples are 9 Crimes, Volcano, or It Takes a Lot to Know a Man. Another thing about him is that he makes climax, so he always has a peak in his songs where he starts shouting and he plays the chords very fast, and he has some parts where it's completely quiet and he's just singing quietly or whispering, and the juxtaposition of these different extremes and the gray areas in between them, or the progression to the peak of the song, creates a sort of emotional movement, if you can call it that. And the last thing about Damien Rice is, although he makes romantic music, he is a perfectionist. As we talked about perfectionism in our previous episode with Tool, he wants to do everything perfect. Therefore, when I look at his albums, really most of his songs are good. It's like looking at a poetry book that's selected, and when you're going through a selected book of poetry, then you know that every poem that you see are not just random things. These are amazing poems with great concepts, and a group of people decided that this one is important and necessary for you to read. Therefore, there is definitely something between the lines and how he uses it. He uses his words and chooses them very precisely and carefully. Therefore, how he changes tiny little details between different verses or different courses of his song really matter to what concept he's trying to put out. His conversation with Lisa Hannigan is important. Who's saying from what side with what emotion, and how this makes sense in the context of the song. Another reason that he's a perfectionist is because when you look at all of his albums, you realize that he goes through his songs and he plays around with them until he finally finds a perfect version. For example, some songs like Nine Crimes or Volcano have many different variations, but at the end he decided to choose a certain one after many years of working on it, and that's the one that he released.
December 3rd, 97. A song called Volcano.
Or in his last album, my favorite, Faded Fantasy, you can see that he had about 100 songs, and he chose those 8 songs among those. Therefore, he chooses his words very carefully and perfectly, and that's why he's doing a great job and deserves our attention. Alright, now let's move on to the conceptual analysis of Damien Rice. Although he has some songs like Unplayed Piano and Lonely Soldier, which were written for a certain cause and for his activism purposes, for example, the situation in Tibet or the next Dalai Lama, or the release of Burma's president at the time, the major theme of his work is love, and yes, this time it's not like Leonard Cohen that we talked before. This time it's romantic love. A while ago I got into an argument with someone about country music, modern country music of course, and they asked me why don't I favor country music very much, and I told them that the reason is because they speak of love in a very mediocre way, and it's using the same symbolism and the same things that everyone knows, the cliches over and over and over again, especially in modern country music, not in all of it. Some of the old ones like Chris Christopherson, they have done a great job in depicting human emotion. So Damien Rice is someone who doesn't do that, and he comes around and speaks bravely with a very analytic perspective towards love, and that's what makes his music very beautiful. An important aspect of it is how he analyzes and goes through a journey, and I believe that if we follow him through his albums and how he looks at love and analyzes himself and evaluates himself, his affairs, and tries to find a pattern of growth, we can find something beautiful in his works at the end. What is love?
What is love? Baby, don't hurt me.
Many people say that love is the most important thing in this world, and it's the reason we are connected and unified together, and it's the biggest mystery and the answer to everything. However, Damien Rice, although he's a perfectionist in producing his music, he is in fact an imperfectionist in the conceptual context. He believes that tiny little mistakes can be very useful. For example, in his song Cannonball from his first album, Oh, he talks about an affair, which is like making a mistake. However, at the same time, he says how these mistakes and tiny little things that might be unconventional can end up teaching us the most and be best for us.
Stones taught me to fly. Love, it taught me to lie.
He also later on talks about how love can be imperfect in other ways. For example, in his song Amy, he talks about how we always think of love as this perfect, miraculous thing that's going to come around and fix everything, but usually ends up being pretty rudimentary and normal and boring.
I'm not a miracle. saint, just another soldier on a road to nowhere.
So the thing about imperfectionism is that you appreciate the mistakes. If you go to a class, for example, and you're given a test, all the questions that you know the answer to already are not the ones that are going to help you. You know them already and there's no point in them. However, those questions that you don't know the answer to and you make a mistake are the ones that can actually teach you something and help you better yourself in whatever subject you're being tested on. Therefore, Damien Rice looks at love the same way, and he looks at all the imperfections in himself and in the love and in the partner and analyzes them like a doctor and goes through them one by one and tries to fix things and make a progress of growth within his affairs. For example, in the song Volcano, he talks about expectations of love, of how we expect our partner to be a certain person, a certain thing, or we have different expectations from each other, and that always leads to problems and therefore turns love into a volcano that can hurt us.
You give me miles and miles of mountains, and I ask for the sea.
And sometimes the problem is not expectations from different sides. The problem could be in you. When you're clinging onto someone after you've left them, you look at the relationship that didn't work and you display the emotions of either resentment or disappointment, and you cling to the person. In his song Blower's Daughter, he shows these emotions.
Shorter story. No love, no glory.
But then look at how he finds a solution for this problem as well. One solution that he offers is that throughout the entirety of the song, he keeps saying, I can't take my eyes off you, I can't take my mind off of you. And this keeps on going for quite some time until on the last sentence, right before the song ends, he just throws in this little sentence that says, until I find somebody new. And that is an interesting concept, because one way of dealing with any addiction, whether it's a person or a drug or food or air, is to try to forget about it and fight it. Another way is to find something better to replace it with. For example, when you look at the night with a lot of stars, they are everywhere, and it's hard to keep your eyes off of those stars. But one way that we can, if we desire not to be constantly gazing at the stars, is to find something bigger. So when the sun comes out, it's so powerful and bright that it prevents us from even seeing the stars anymore. And that's one way that he tries to fix this problem and try to stop clinging to the past and the relationship that was destroyed. In his song I Remember, again from his first album, he even looks at love in a different way. What if love is not this mysterious thing and it's just a bunch of hormones that's deriving us towards doing what we do? And love might be hormones, and most definitely is, but to Damien Rice, he's not a person who would leave this. Probably if you tell him love is just hormones, why are you talking about it all the time and singing about it? He probably would not disagree with you, but at the same time it's really important for him to analyze how these hormones work, how every single delicate detail of when we are engaged in such relationships that produce these hormones, how they work and what we feel, and how in a humanistic point of view we go about them.
Are you reborn? Blow off my horn, I'm driving real hard. This is love, this is porn.
So he analyzes every aspect of romantic love, and this is really interesting. Damien Rice's albums are like a full guide to every emotion that we feel in relationships. Sometimes he talks about missing out on opportunities to love someone in his song Cheers Darling, and then later on in his song Prague he follows up with this concept and talks about not having to deal with it and seeing that person getting married. And other times he talks about having to face loneliness or staying in a relationship where the love is not real. For example, in his song Elephant. He talks about all the things that we experience normally. For example, in a romantic love, sometimes we feel lost within paradoxes of all the reasons that we have to leave someone and all the emotions that tells us to stay. And he shows his rage and anger in some songs like Rootless Tree, and how this struggle can lean on us and make us miserable.
Reinvent and believe, and it leans on me like a ruler.
Sometimes he talks of looming of new emotions towards new people, for example, in his song Dogs, and how love can be also easy and much less complicated than all of these things that we talk about. Other times he's directly talking about hypocrisy and lies that concern our relationships, where all these justifications and rationalizations to keep ourselves with someone. In the song The Professor and La Fidance talks about how maybe his questioning and his attempt to be like a doctor and a professor trying to know everything about love can hinder the process and make him disenchanted, killing the mystery of love. And he comes around and says with bravery, sometimes I don't know, and maybe it's good that I don't know. So far we've gone through his first 2 albums and some of his side releases that he had during these years. But then what happens before the 3rd album is that he breaks up with Lisa Hannigan, where they originally met to form the band, and they fall in love and they sing with each other and they have this complicated relationship. After the album 9, Damien Royce becomes very successful, and according to himself, he feels arrogant and he feels like he should be happy, but he still isn't, and this bothers him. Everything goes wrong. He breaks up with Lisa Hannigan, he breaks up his band, and he starts doing some concerts that he looks absolutely miserable. Then he goes into an 8-year break where he doesn't produce any music. He just sits in his room and does his things, and he's in a different mood until finally he finds another producer who comes to him and encourages him to stand up. And when he finally starts to make peace with himself during these years, he changes and he finally finds music exciting again. And after 8 years, he releases his 3rd album, my favorite, Faded Fantasy. And for the first time, he signs it off with Warner Brothers, which is a big company. Again, his 3rd album is a masterpiece because it takes you through a journey. He starts talking about all these 8 years, and it's a perfect follow-up where he finally makes peace with himself, and he finally finds some sort of balance, and it's an amazing album to listen to. When he begins his 3rd album, his first song, my favorite, Faded Fantasy, he addresses all the things that happened, the emotions that he had when he lost, per se, Lisa Hannigan, and or any other similar long relationship, and it's his first album without her. It depicts this emotions of loss very beautifully and admits his defeat and says how it's never gonna be the same without her. And then the moment 2nd track of this album starts, he engages in a different path from all those emotions of resentment towards a new place where it's a place of growth. The song It Takes a Lot to Know a Man. There was a movie by Keanu Reeves called Man of Tai Chi, and in this movie there was a guy who started doing Tai Chi and he was the best warrior. But at the end of the movie he gets defeated by his biggest ally, and that's all because of his arrogance. And last scene of the movie, something interesting happens. His opponent tells him that you're nothing, and as he's on the ground defeated, he looks at himself and he says, I'm nothing. you're right. And then he stands up and kicks his ass. Now, there's an important lesson there, and it's similar to what Damien Rice talks about in his second song. It's good for us to know that we don't know, and it's good for us to admit that we've been wrong, we've been arrogant, and that can help us grow. And it takes an effort. It takes an effort to know our vulnerabilities and dealing with them. So in his song, he has two sides, from a man and a woman, and each with their own charms and problems. The best part of this song is where he's harmonizing these words underneath.
What are you so afraid to lose? What is it you're thinking that will happen if you do?
And then after he's grown, in the song Greatest Bastard, he makes his formal apology, and he comes around and says that I learned a lot from all these experiences, and I've made mistakes and I stand by them, and I'm sorry that I did so. And then his next song, I Don't Want to Change You, works with the concept of perfect love, where we always think there should be a perfect person out there that would absolutely love everything about us, and we would love everything about them because we are a perfect match. He kind of lets go of this concept and finally says that love could be more than just finding a perfect person that comes around and everything automatically works. It's rather about sacrifice, about patience, about accepting them as who they are, not wanting to change them, and being patient, sometimes letting go is love. And also in the peak of this song, he talks about how there should be also those emotions of love, and that's what fixes everything. Because no matter how different you are with somebody else, if you love them, you're willing to go the distance and ignore their problems, their mistakes, and forgive and be happy. And happiness is different from inconvenience. Many things that your partner might do could be inconvenient to you, but just the matter of fact that you are putting yourself in that position of inconvenience for them can keep you happy. And he admits this too, and goes on with this verse. So the Damien Rice from before that was constantly fighting with himself, fighting with his relationships, trying to fix everything, starts accepting everything and takes a whole different path from here forward, where he says that all his methods, from trying to forget love, erasing it, covering it up, were wrong. Hiding away from it is not a part also. We can't just say, oh, I don't want to be in love, I just want to be alone. He says all these useless dreams of being alone, like a dogless bone. We do need to be in love, and we need to make it work, and the best way to do it is by accepting it and by allowing ourselves to be loved and allowing ourselves to love others as well. In the box, he talks to himself. Metaphorically, we are all talking to a person inside of us that represents us with the box that we should be content with, and say, this is all you have. You can't achieve more. You have to be always depressed. You have to be always melancholic. You have to just deal with the fact that things are not going to work. And Damien Rice goes into a ring, as he would like to say it, with himself, and starts boxing with himself and telling himself that things can be and should be different, and defeats the Damien inside him that tells him nothing's going to get better. And then right before his album ends, he has a song where he invites you to join him in his boat and come with all your mistakes and all your vulnerabilities, and start accepting the world as it is, and being positive toward it, and going with him to a journey that's going to be a long journey, that's going to involve a lot of ups and downs and a lot of looking for enoughs that would never be enough, in his song Long Way, where he ends his third album. And thank you for listening to this romantic of the business name and those. So Damien Rice's world is full of gray areas. There's so little black and white in there. Damien Rice's world is a brave world where you look at yourself. It's full of self-reflection. It's a world where you take every little emotion seriously and also look at very serious things in a very humorous tone.
And I'm so childish, a little bit wildish with my I'm so uncaring, do far too much fucking swearing.
And that would conclude my short episode on Damien Rice. If you like him and his poetry, his self-analysis, and the growth, you can also look into similar artists like Cloud Cult that have a range of albums, especially their last albums, The Seeker. They work beautifully around the concept of self-reflection and finding yourself. Other people like Angus and Julia Stone have the similar brave tone towards love. We have Anthony and the Johnsons, which have that deep and profound poetry which reflects human emotions without being shying away from any of it. And we also have Jeff Buckley, which has a rich poetry, and I've mentioned him in most of my episodes. I didn't make an episode about him, but I really encourage you to listen to his album, because he has one album. Well, that's it. I need to start college, so I won't be around for about a year or so until if I decide to make more videos. During this season, we tried to learn how to analyze different works of art, and a couple of things that are important as we learned through this season were to find references, read a lot from philosophy, poetry, history, and be able to connect the dots that artists lay upon us. Paying attention to little details in poetry, sometimes injecting our feelings to see how this song resonates with us, and sometimes injecting our logic to try to figure out how the pieces fit together. I also wanted to thank a couple of my friends who helped me with the making of this season. Adam Benaroya with writing this episode, Puya Molai from Turkey with writing Tom Waits' episode, Ibrahim Safavi from Germany, which is the backbone of all these operations, and another one of my friends who's going to remain anonymous, OD from Canada, that helped me with the Leonard Cohen episode, and myself mostly. I did all the work. You're welcome. And as Damien Rice says, life taught me to die, so it's not hard to fall when you flow like a cannonball.
And I don't want to lose. It's not hard to grow when you know that you just don't know.